May it please the Court. Counsel, ladies and gentlemen, it's my opportunity now to go back and try to speak to you about a lot of issues that we've talked about in this case. And as I sit here and begin to think and talk to you, I want to go back and I want to remind you as to why you folks are the ones that are here making this decision today. Okay. I spoke to a lot of you, pretty much all of you. Co-counsel spoke to some of you who are on the jury. I like to talk to the people because I know that I'm going to be the last one to hear from. The people that are actually going to make the decision. And when I did that, I told everybody, I said, I want you to think about why we go through this process the way we do. Because I told each one of you, I said, we can pretty much grab anybody off the street that's got reasonable intelligence and common sense. And we can ask them to come down here and make a decision of whether or not somebody is guilty of an offense. But we spent 2 months of our lives picking you to hear this case, because when we spent that time with you, we put our trust in you. And we knew that based upon our explanations to you of how our system worked and what could cause somebody to get a death sentence, every one of you showed that you had the level of understanding to make the proper decision. And folks, it's hard as I stand here and argue to you to do so without talking to you about the elephant in the room. Okay. And that elephant in the room in this case is Miss Kendra Hatcher. And folks, by all accounts, that was a beautiful young lady, an angel. And her loss and her pain, it cannot be made up for. And when we talked about the issues in this case, we talked about what causes somebody who has been convicted of capital murder to get a death sentence. You told me that every one of you said, I don't know what the process is. I don't know how you go from being guilty to getting death. And I remember I would ask you, well, what do you think? Do you think you go back there and you hear the case and then you go back there and when you're finished, you go back there and you check a box based on whether or not you think the crime was worthy of somebody getting death? And most of you said, well, that makes sense. That makes sense. But we spent a lot of time talking to you individually to make sure that you understood that that is not how it works. And they have lost sight of that here in this courtroom today, as they have for the last few weeks. And they stand before you today making arguments that if you think about them and you take them to their base level, have nothing to do with the issues before you in this part of the trial. Nothing. Absolutely nothing to do with what we are deciding in this courtroom today. As Mr. Peel got here and spoke to you about a moment ago, your verdict of guilty in this case gave Kristopher Love the punishment for capital murder in our community, which is life without the possibility of parole. And that's what people get for capital murder in the state of Texas. When we talk in Ward Hour, we use words like, that's the default punishment. That's the presumed punishment. That's the legislative punishment. Well, whatever word you want to put before the word punishment doesn't matter. Life without parole is the punishment for capital murder in the state of Texas. And we talked to you about that. How do you think our system works? How do you think we choose whether it's going to be Kristopher Love, a person in this chair now getting a death sentence, when we know that the vast majority, the highest 90 percentile of people who have committed the exact same acts to other victims, they don't get it. And that goes back not only to justice, but it goes and fairness, but it goes back to an inspection of our system. How is that right that Kristopher Love's here today? And the state has the audacity to stand up here and say, this whole case was decided because he did an act that was planned. And he proved to you right then that he will always be a future danger. And they sat here and made that argument to you less than 5 minutes ago. Every one of you heard it. And I'm going to tell you right now, folks, I have no doubt as I stand here, but that argument probably got somebody shaking their head. That's all I needed to know. I know that. That's not the type of juror that you promised us that you would be. That's not the juror that we put our trust in, that said, I will come into his courtroom if I am selected, and I will be governed by the law. I will not let inflamed passion. I will not hear pleas for retribution. I will not sit here and let them talk just repeatedly and hold these pictures showing you the crime scene, showing you the victim, talking about the pain inflicted upon the family of Miss Hatcher. And folks, it's horrible, it's unspeakable. And he has been punished by your verdict of guilty with a sentence of death in the penitentiary. And we talked about that concept with each one of you. A sentence of life without parole is in effect a sentence of death in the penitentiary. What is it now to go back there and check off these boxes or answer these questions? Nothing. It doesn't speed it up. Give them another 10, 12, 15 years. Sit there and appeal it, and then maybe someday they'll wheel him out there on a journey and put him to death. What's that accomplished? What's it accomplished? And why would you do that to somebody who has already received the punishment that everybody else gets? And the state says, well, in this case, it is a planned, premeditated murder. That penitentiary down there, folks, is full of people that have committed planned, premeditated murders. Murders for greed, murders for profit. State don't seek death on those. What is it about this particular case? Well, I'll tell you what it is. Look out that door right there. You see that camera sticking in here? That's why we are here today. That's why we are here today. Because of this victim. Because of this victim. Because of this victim. He's easy target. Young man with a record. No great deeds in his life. We'll talk about that later. I'm not here to hide from the facts. We've got an angelic victim. And the state says that because of that, he should die. And each one of you said and gave us your word and your oath that would not happen under your watch unless the state could meet the burden of proof that they have in this case. What separates the person who must or the person who should? The person who justly should receive a sentence of death from those who shouldn't are these special issues. These special issues, folks. Now, you know, like I said, I know I may be only speaking to a couple of you. I know that. I sat here and I watched you cry as you heard the testimony. Broke my heart too. And I know some of you can't wait to get back there. It's big. I've seen enough. I've heard enough. And you remember the state of Texas out there, and they get up here now and they argue this case to you now in a way to inflame your passions, to inflame your feelings of revenge. And the court's own instruction will tell you. The court's words to you. You told us that you would be governed in this case by the law and by the evidence. And I'm going to talk to you about it. The law tells you you are not to be swayed by sentiment, conjecture, sympathy, passion, prejudice, public opinion, or public feeling in considering these issues. Now ask yourself, why does the state stand before you now and argue continually about whether or not he's guilty of this offense? He's guilty of the offense. Folks, I ask you in the guilt innocence phase of this trial to go back and look at the evidence in this case. Look at it closely and make your decision, and we'd live with it. And we have. You know, remember when I told you that people of reasonable intelligence and reasonable common sense can usually make the right decision? Don't you know that I figured that it was going to be an occasion where I'd be standing before you having this very talk now? I'd seen the evidence. I knew what we had before you, but my client is entitled to his rights to have a jury make sure the state has met their burden. And it's not just in the guilt-innocence phase. It's not just there. But that verdict alone, death sentence, life without parole, in the penitentiary. Now, I'm going to talk to you about these special issues. I'm going to talk to you about the evidence that we have in this case. And I want to remind you that every one of you, even the ones that I didn't talk to, were reminded of a couple of things. And that is that just because the state's asking for a sentence of death, that don't mean it's appropriate. You know, as jurors sitting here today, that we go through this process and we have the world looking on with the cameras in the rooms, and sometimes the jurors say, I'm sorry, there's been a failure of proof on the issues before us. And why is that? Either the law and the evidence is on your side, or it's not. Or it's not. And folks, I'm going to tell you something right now. Whenever Mr. Fitzmark is up here and he's talking to you, and he's a heck of a lot more eloquent than I am, but when he's showing you the pictures of the gore, and he's talking to you about the damage inflicted, you ask yourself, is this address the special issues? Special issue number one. Whether there is a probability that the defendant will commit criminal acts of violence that constitute a continuous threat to society. And we talked about that, and we spent a majority of our time talking to you about that special issue. And folks, that is now their problem. That is now their problem. Because just the same as at the guilt-innocence phase of the trial, they have the burden of proof to convince each one of you beyond all reasonable doubt that if not for the fact that this man is given a sentence of death, he will be in all probability, continuous threat in his society, which we know is life in that penitentiary without parole. And they come in here today and they stand before you and wave bloody photographs talking about planning and premeditation, tells you all you need to know. And they say, well, look, when we spoke to you in Fort Dyer, we talked to you about, and y'all told us that sometimes the case might tell you all you need to know. They put up the slide, says, here's some factors, planning and premeditation, for greed, for profit. So we pulled these off of your questionnaires. And y'all remember that there's 20 pages. I had to read about 4,000 of them. And they said, we pulled these words off your questionnaire, so look at them here, be reminded of that. And what do they want you to do? They want you to go back to the misinformed, miseducated members of our community that you were before the day you walked in this world. Just think about it. Think about it. You didn't know how you got a death sentence in this community. Had no idea. We talked about it. We talked about the fact that probably 98% of the lawyers in this building don't know how the law in the state of Texas applies and causes certain individuals to get death and others not. And we told you, the reason we ask you these things, the reason we have you fill out these questionnaires is to see what kind of humanity, what kind of human nature you're bringing in here into the courtroom before we have an opportunity to explain the law to you. Whether or not there is a probability, not possibility, but more likely than not, that they have proven to you that this defendant, if not given a sentence of death, will commit criminal acts of violence, constituting a continuous threat to society. Look at the pictures. Look at the harm done to her family. Look at the pain done caused to his family. And that'll answer the question. No, folks, it really doesn't. It really doesn't. I asked each and every one of you, I said, Ladies and gentlemen, would you, on this issue, because we know that the litmus test in the state of Texas, the question that decides whether or not someone is going to get death is special issue number one. Talk to every one of you. Go back and think about what we talked about for 45 minutes apiece. Special issue number one. And I said, now, if you go back there and then let's look at special issue number one. Show me anywhere in that question where it says anything about the defendant having committed a horrible, senseless crime. It's not there. It's not there. Is there anything in special issue number one that talks about the fact that the victim was a model citizen, a paragon of virtue, somebody with friends and family members that could pull your heart from your chest? No, it's not there. The question is there is, can the state of Texas prove beyond all reasonable doubt that if you do not give him a sentence of death, that in all probability he's going to continue to victimize? What do we have on that issue? Well, the state gets up here, and I guess, they want to mock the families of the defendant for some reason. These folks they're victims too. That didn't sound like a lot of mitigation to us. They just came up and said they're hard-working people. Well, that's if you look at it as far as mitigation. We brought these people to you to consider across the board, because the evidence that you hear in the punishment phase, you consider for not one question, but for both questions. And the information that you got from the witnesses that we called should help you. And in fact, ladies and gentlemen, they cannot run and hide, in this case, from their own expert. Their own expert. I'm going to talk to you about what their expert said. I want to try something I ain't never been able to do it, but they're going to have a PowerPoint up here. It's got 7 things I want you to go back. I want to visit that we know now are from their expert. And the reason when we call it expert, that is a person who has been brought before a jury, and because of their unique training, their unique knowledge, and their unique experience, can bring home to the uninformed, those without knowledge of an area that they are familiar with, that can explain it to them in a way to help them understand. I had mine sitting in the courtroom waiting to testify. There's a guy up here and did a perfect job. He got up there on that witness stand, and Warden Todd Harris got up there and told you the truth. It's not often I stand before a jury and say that the state's witnesses in the punishment portion of a trial have gotten up without an axe to grind. But I'll stand here before you today to tell you that it would be unconscionable for you to go back there and say, I can ignore the testimony of the state's own expert witness when it comes to the issue of future danger. Because if you look at that question again and you take out all of the attempts to inflame your passions and pull you away from the issues of what that question asks you, the question answers itself. We talked to the warden and I said, Warden, we know because, number one, you are an expert, you are in the system, you are in the penal aspect of our system, and that's what we have here, folks. We have a system. And this system starts out on the street with the police. Starts with the police, it moves to the district attorney's office. It comes to the court system. It becomes the responsibility of those charged to assist people accused of offenses. There's a judicial system that has a responsibility. There's a jury system that has a responsibility. And when a defendant makes his way and moves through that system, if the system works properly, then justice prevails in our city. in our community and in our state. But if any part of it breaks down, we have injustice. And that's what the state seeks here today with their calls for revenge. With their calls for revenge. Truths. This last slide says truths regarding the propensity for violence or disciplinary behavior problems in prison. And I'm going to cover these with you, one by one, because I covered every one of them with the warden. Every single one of them. And every single one of these things I'm about to show you that I've talked to the warden about, their expert witness, every one of them applies to this case. And to go back and find otherwise would be to ignore the law and the evidence that you've been given. Did you go to the first slide? Truth number one that we know. And did you notice Mr. Lord gets up here and goes, and I'm going to tell you, it's not over yet, folks. It's not over yet. Y'all heard this term crawfishing, where people are saying something, or they got something out there they got to get away from. The state's got to get away from Warden Harris. Because he got up there and he told you the truth. Not one truth or two, but several. Truths that we know from the expert witness now that information has been given to you. And then Mr. Lord gets up and goes, oh yeah, we'll talk about this 30-year study. Yeah, this is a 30-year study. It doesn't really, you know what. To get up here in light of the expert testimony and say, oh, let's just ignore that. Why would they want to ignore it? Because we know that the defendant's 34. And we know from and this isn't a study, the 30-year study. This is from a lifetime of experience and expertise in the field of penology. Running these prisons, making daily decisions that affect the welfare and security of all those people in the system. And the first one is, if you're over 30, you have significantly low risk of any disciplinary or violent infractions in our system. Defendant's there. We know that over the age of 39, the prospect or propensity for future disciplinary or violent behaviors is virtually non-existent. We talk about the death penalty, ladies and gentlemen, as society's self-defense. Society's self-defense. And we talk about the rights that you, as private citizens, have to defend your lives, the lives of your loved ones, from others. And we all talked about this concept of society's self-defense. Do we have to take this person's life to protect those around him? Well, the first one you consider in making that decision is truth number one. Go into truth number two. Warden, I'm going to talk to you about something. And again, y'all would have to listen to the state when they try to get away from these truths, but you know them. And then if you think that there's something in one of these slides that isn't right, disagree about it. Write a note and say, we disagree, because we're not sure the warden said that. Yeah. You'll get the evidence. You'll know the truths. Do you have the moral courage? Do you have the moral fiber to make the right decision and maybe not what might be perceived as a popular decision? But we go to truth number two, and the warden told you that, yeah, the record of behavioral, institutional behavior is a massively important, significant indicator of risk of future disciplinary or violent behavior. Why is that important? Mr. Brooks gets up there and goes, yeah, well, they brought you a half a dozen guards or so. I didn't care if they could have brought 50. What's absent here in this case? What's absent? Folks, I'm not going to try to run. I'm not going to try to hide from the evil deed that you convicted of when I'm committed. Not going to do it. Can't do it. Won't do it. That's the only thing that they can do is say, look at this ignore the rest. He's not going to do that. He's done a horrible deed. We don't talk about that. But we know that as it applies to this defendant on the issue that you have to answer based on the law and the evidence in this case is that if you have a non-existent record of institutional behavior problems, that proves what we need to know about you to a large part. Not the only factor, but it's one of the factors. Add that together with the age factor. Add that together with the other truths that we know. We move to the next truth. That family involvement and visitation with the inmate is proven to reduce the risk of that inmate having any disciplinary or violent problems. Now, let's go back to what we did yesterday. Okay, maybe it's not the greatest mitigation. Maybe a lot of people come from a broken home. But you've seen evidence that these people love their relative. They love their son. They love their brother. This man is loved. He may have done something horrible, but he is loved, and he does have a family. And the institutional division of the corrections facility is full of people like him. But not all are like him. Not all have families that are willing to stand by him. They're willing to come down. And what does that tell us about special issue number 1? Why did we bring it to you? Why did we bring you his family and talk to you about how they circled around? Even in maybe delusional hopes that maybe he didn't do what he was accused of. Maybe wanting to go through life. Never being able to say, I know in my heart that he did it. Doesn't matter. The question is, what do we know? Well, we know when you have the family that's willing to stand behind him, that that's going to take away significantly any possibility or probability for sure that that person's going to do anything wrong in the institution. We brought you these guards, and we brought you, I don't know, 6, 7, could have brought you 10, 12. They said, well, bring 50. Well, let me tell you something, folks. Did you notice that they flying people all the way across the state come here and say, yeah, I took this little written statement from the defendant? Y'all notice that? Y'all heard us mention in talking to the witnesses that our team was loaded up and flown to the city of Memphis, gone to Tennessee, visited and met with people, talked to people there, same as they have. And what's it for? Seek evidence, to seek things to bring you to help you answer these questions. Now, if they have something other than just inflaming your passions about the crime itself, don't you know you'd have had it in here? If you know he's been locked up and been in prison for several years. Ample opportunities for disciplinary and violence problems. You know, folks, the truth of the matter is some folks just get along. Some folks are just meant to be locked up. Some folks just can't be out of the street. Do we have any evidence whatsoever that Kristopher Love can't be locked up? Cannot be locked up successfully without the need to take his life? Because that's the question. Do we have to take his life to prevent him from being a continuous threat? Well, you've got a pretty good, you've got about 9 years now that he's been locked up, counting the time when he was in jail and prison in Tennessee, counting the last 3 years he's been in jail here in Dallas County. And folks, do you think let me ask y'all something. Do you think very often, in all honesty, as a juror, if we were to come down here and say, pull somebody off the street and say, hey, come here, how many times do you think you can line up with 10 or 12 jailers, come down and talk about someone being in Bible prison? Would any of you have thought that was ever possible? It's not something you see. It's not something you see. It's not something that you know about. But I think intuitively it would tell you that that's not normal. And the reason why you don't bring one person in here, the first lady I called, Miss Prince, if y'all recall her, real nice lady. She could come in here and say, yeah, the defendant's always been real sweet to me, been nice to me. State's response, well, possibly he might remind her of his grandma and was just being nice to her. We brought you a cross-section of people that have worked with him for the last 3 years, and everybody he has come into contact with says, no problem whatsoever, courteous, respectful. In fact, the reason we took him out of the behavioral, or not the behavioral, the high publicity tank, was because the youngsters got around him, started getting rowdy. He didn't want no part. That's what you use when you answer special issue number 1. You don't go back and look at the picture of the crime. The state says, well, y'all told us you could consider the crime, and you can. But you cannot be blinded by the crime. Can we go to the next slide? This question, this truth, I never even really thought about this till this Long throws up the thing. Well, Warden, if they're doing locked up for parole, they got no reason, they got no incentive to do right, do they? Y'all remember that question? That was the state's question to the state's expert witness trying to prove to you reasons why you need to kill Kristopher Love. Well, Warden, since he can't ever get out, there's no reason for him to act right, is it? The Warden said, whoa, no, that's not true. We have multiple incentives that exist in our system that give people a reason and a motivation to reduce their risk factors for violence or disciplinary problems. And folks, I throw the word disciplinary problems in this here, and I'm going to tell you right now, that's not a consideration. Disciplinary problem is not a criminal act of violence. We talked about that. I'm talking about disciplinary. I'm adding that to this equation because that takes it down even so much lower than just a question of, is this a criminal act of violence? I'm talking about a person who's going to be disrespectful, a person who might engage in behaviors that can cause problems. And they're experts telling us that so far, through truth number 4, Kristopher Love, flying colors through this system. The next of truth. These next two, folks, I'm going to tell you right now. I use the word counterintuitive a lot. And that's a big word. I'm not sure if I know what it means. But I'm going to tell you what I'm trying to tell you when I use it. Counterintuitive means, as I said earlier, if you yank people in off the street and start asking them questions, and you find out what they know about a subject, you're going to find out that they really don't know the right things, like we did with you. We tried to mold you by explaining the law to you. But human nature, and I talk to everyone about human nature. Human nature grabs a hold of us, and we've got to recognize it so that we can pull it away and set it aside and go forth with our newfound knowledge. And this is one of those things that if you think about it, from their own expert witness has told you that this is a truth, yet their whole argument to you today as to why to put Kristopher Love to death is against this truth. The nature and the method of the capital murder has absolutely no correlation to a propensity for violence or discipline problems. That's from their expert. That's not just from their expert. It's the truth. It's the truth. It is the truth. Now we can run and hide from the truth, or we can embrace the truth. We can go back there and say that justice requires the verdict that is called for by the law and the evidence and the truth. And if you accept these truths as facts, because you now have evidence that they are, you can't escape from it. And the state says, well, ladies and gentlemen, if he did it for profit, then he'll do it again. He'll be down there in prison doing it again as soon as someone asks him. Prisons are full of people there for doing crime for profit. And the warden told us, we studied it all, and it has no effect whatsoever. So you can go back there and you can say, well, Mr. Johnson, we appreciate your time and your argument on the point, but that's not the truth to us. Well, every one of you told me, because I asked, would you be open to listening to expert witnesses on issues involving our system, our prison system. Every one of you was asked that question, and every one of you said, several of you said, I wouldn't just listen, I would welcome the opportunity to learn. As I stand before you today, were you being serious now? Were you being honest with me? Were you being honest with yourself? Because if you were, you can't hide from these truths. Truth number 6 tells us something else. Those convicted, and see, this right here goes right back in the face of their arguments, and it's going to be right back when Glenn's going to get up here and start yelling about when I sit down. And the warden told us truth number 6. Those convicted of the worst capital murders have no greater propensity for violence than any other category of criminal offender. It's counterintuitive, shocking, against everything you would have believed as you walked in here 2 months ago to start considering being on this case. I would assume so. But see, folks, we've got a system in place to take care of people who violate the law. Execution is serious business. It's serious business. And it's not to be undertaken unless absolutely necessary. And the state has not proven that too. But the only way they can even get close is if they ask you to ignore these truths and you let them do it. And every one of you told me that you are independent, you have the ability to make your own decision, and you have the ability to make an unpopular decision. And you stand by it, you live with it. You live with it. Going to truth number 7. The Texas prison system can control an inmate without resorting to the necessity of a sentence of death. I asked that question almost verbatim to Warden Harris, and his response was yes. His response was yes. Now, the state came in here, appropriate for today's Halloween. The state came in here yesterday and through Miss Long, talked to you and tried to talk to that witness. The same thing they're trying to do today is conjure up this scary image of not truths and probabilities, but scariness and possibilities. And it's just not right. Because their own witness has told you. Every question Miss Long asked, I went back and I asked the warden. I said, well, Miss Long goes back, it's possible that somebody could be 34 and become a terrible person. Well, yeah. Anything's possible. If the word in special issue number 1 was possible, I would be wasting my breath. There would be no necessity for a trial. Because anything and everything is possible. More likely than not. More likely than not. Prison system control. They sit here, and I submit to you, the only reason they put their expert on is they don't want mine to get up here and tell you the same thing.
I don't object to and going into his expert or his expert was
I'll rephrase it. The truth's the truth. The truth's the truth no matter who tells it to you, but the fact that their own expert told it to you ought to mean something to you. I hope that as he testified yesterday, it grabbed you by your collar. It shook you and caused you to say, what are we doing here if the issue in this case is truly these special issues and not just the inflammation and the public sentiment towards death? Because Kristopher Love did an evil deed against an innocent victim. I hope it did. And I'm going to take you folks at your word and your oath that you would follow the law and the evidence in this case. If you look at these truths, every question that was asked was an attempt to try to get away from them. And once I finished cross-examining Warden Harris, The city went right back to it. Well, it's possible this, isn't it? Well, I guess. It's possible this. Yeah, it could be. Now go back to the thought, folks. You know how the defendant would be housed. They tried to make it sound like you just go down here and you walk out on a junior high school campus. When I started asking him about the nuts and the bolts of the system, he got right down to it, didn't he? And you remember the state even said, well, officer, you have staff, you have probably your unit for assaults, don't you? No. Y'all remember that question? Remember the answer? No. Well, that's I mean, they can argue that way because he's the warden of some low risk unit or, well, wait a second. No, he's not. He's the warden of the unit that's maximum security and houses death row inmates as well as those serving life without parole. And he said the worst people who can do anything, or the ones that are likely to do anything, are those around 20. But we know that Kristopher Love would go through that diagnostics process, and he would be put in a situation where because of his lifetime, because of his life, and the state says, well, look at his life. He's committed this crime. He committed this. He did this. And see, we know now that that doesn't matter about how you're going to do in the future in the penitentiary. Because do you recall the question that I asked him? I should have put up one more slide. Do you remember the question? Or is there any correlation between your behavior in the free world to how you're going to behave in prison? He said, no, not that we know of. We look at the factors that we know are true. We look at those things that have proven to be true over our lifetime in this business. In our lifetime of dealing with people charged with crimes and that we are held to safeguard from those around them and themselves. And these are the truths that are before you. And every one of them apply to Kristopher Love. Does he have to be executed in this case because he is truly a risk? Not just possibly, but probably. To be a continuous threat when we know all the years of his life, almost a third of the years of his life he's been locked up. And they hadn't found a single person to come down here that could say he even spoke a disrespectful word. What lengths will this take up to try to get you shook up? Mr. Lord. Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Look at yesterday. That violent outburst here in the courtroom. You know, folks, I don't know what you saw. I don't know what you perceived. Apparently, he saw some kind of big outburst here in the courtroom yesterday. I saw a man who's had to sit here in this courtroom for the last 2 months, listening 5 times a day, and you'll recall it because every one of you were asked this question before you took your seat over here. But that man had to sit here, and it's because of his evil deed. I'm not making excuses. But you weren't the only people asked the question by the state. And you remember it when they finished asking each one of you. Let me tell you how they kill them. They put them in that box and they hold them 23 hours a day. And when the time comes, they bring them out. And if they don't want to come, they force them. If they got to fight them, they fight them. They will get him out there. They'll take him down there and they're going to strap him to that gurney. And they're going to pump him full of chemicals so he's laying there dead. They told every one of you that story. And then they stop and say, now we don't tell you that to be morbid. We don't tell you that to be morbid. Well, what do you think the purpose was, folks? The purpose was to see if you got it in your heart the ability to take part in that process. Every single one of you said yes. Every single one of you said yes. And if you would have said no, you'd have been like everybody else that said no, and you would not be here today. So our charge coming in this courtroom was to seek to find people that could not only do it if it was appropriate, but that would not do it if they did not believe it to be appropriate. Demanded by the law and the evidence. Called for by an amount of proof, facts, and testimony that would convince you beyond all reasonable doubt that they have met their burden on that special issue. The same burden that they have to convict somebody of a crime itself. Because the law tells you the answer to that question is no. And you can't switch it unless they convince you. And to do so, you have to ignore every truth you now know. And I talked to you, and I said, you know, being on the jury, the ones I spoke to, I don't think my co-counsel do, I always like to use the example about us. And I said, y'all know back in the old days, they used to have firing squads. And they'd take 4 or 5 men, put them in a row, and they'd hand them all a rifle, and give them all one bullet. They take somebody, and they would place him on the post, and each man would load his gun, and they would shoot through the chest area of the condemned. And I asked you, I said, do you know that they always gave one person a blank? One person got a blank. And I asked you, I said, can you think of the reason why they did that? And the reason is because that way everybody could escape responsibility for their act. They could go back, and when they put their head on their pillow at night, they could say, well, maybe I had the blank. Maybe I'm not responsible for this death. You can't run. You can't hide. You took an oath and said you could do this job. The most difficult task you could ever undertake. But you told us you could do it. And you told us you would only do it if it was the last resort. The last resort. Have you really been convinced that if he's not put to death, that he's just going to be a continuing problem? Can you really ignore the truths that we have before us? Can you really ignore those truths? After the reward to testify, I believe we began an undertaking of doing our best in some ways to give you a glimpse into the life of Kristopher Love and maybe some of those things that brought him here. Not as an excuse. There's no excuse. I agree 100% with the state when they say that the evil deed he did has caused ripples of damage throughout our community. You've seen it. You've seen the heartbreak. You've heard all about it. And it has its place. In the typical murder trial, we all talked to you about it, the state, in punishment, because the range of punishment is 5 years all the way up to life, they're going to inflame. They're going to inflame. They're going to bring the pictures back, the gory photos. They're going to ask you to go back and think of nothing but the crime itself and talk about how the crime was so bad that it demands the ultimate of life. But here they have no new evidence. They have no new argument. And yet they say the only appropriate punishment here is death. And why are our prisons full of other people who have committed capital murder and never face this decision? We talked to you about that. We talked to you about that just from the standpoint of fairness. The standpoint of fairness. Because we told you that in considering the mitigation special issue, you can consider whatever you know about a person. You can consider everything you know about their background. Everything that you have before you. Every factor that you have seen in the courtroom, that you have heard in the courtroom. And the state says, well, gosh, look at this outburst by the defendant. All Chris Love did, he calls it outburst. I'll tell you what I think it was. I guess everybody gets to paint their own picture. As his sister there, about to go through an emotional breakdown, he finally had enough. Or couldn't take anymore, just having to listen. Maybe finally come to the realization of the hurt and the harm that he's caused. He tried to walk out of the courtroom. He didn't do anything violent. Didn't harm him. If he had, you would have had it. Let me tell you what I saw. He's a human man. He's a son. He's a brother. Now he's just human. His dad got up there and told you he's doing something horrible, but I love him. And he's deserving of love. He's deserving. He needs to be punished. He's going to be punished. But you go back there, when you consider the mitigation evidence that we brought to you in this case, we brought it to you knowing that as Mr. Peel and Mr. Warren, as we did all these interviews and we saw the nature of what we were being told by these people that we presented, it was like nobody was even in the same family from the standpoint of being able to give any details. You saw that. We purposely brought that to you so that you could see the chaos. And I made the mistake of using the phrase chaos and chaotic with Kim Love Sr. And when I asked him, I said, and then Glenn said, well, really, you say it was chaos. Was it really chaos? Maybe not. Kim, do you know what the word chaos means? Yeah, well, maybe not. Could you tell me? I mean, that's my fault. It's not that. But it just goes to show the nature of the situation that we're dealing with. They're good folks. A lot of good folks. A lot of good folks on his side have been hurt also. But you know, folks, when you look at those special issues, special issue number 1 doesn't say nothing about good folks hurt, bad folks hurt. Special issue number 1 says, do we have to kill to protect? Do we have to kill to protect? Nowhere up there does it allow for killing for revenge. Nowhere up there does it allow for killing for retribution. Nowhere there does it allow to kill to satisfy the urge of the public who are uninformed, misguided, not aware of the laws that apply. Because, you know, if folks, like I said, if it was just public sentiment, thoughts on, you know, we hear it every day. How can you represent these people that do bad things? Well, they're humans. There's somebody's son, daughter, brother. There's good all. Evil deeds sometimes are done by people who are totally evil. Sometimes they're done by people who just make horrible mistakes. And the prosecution will probably beat me up about using that phrase. Are we going to call this a mistake? No, folks, it is what it is. He did what he did, and you've convicted him of it. He's going to die in the penitentiary because of it. He's going to do. He's being punished. He's already died. He's punished. Probably at this time, folks are wasting time. I don't want to repeat myself anymore. I don't know what else I can really say to you that I haven't covered. The last thing that I'm going to talk to you about as I sit down is we all talked about the inherent fairness of the system. And in talking about this, I do so with the understanding that the state will respond and say Mr. Johnson is trying to belittle or not belittle, but probably the word would be minimize his client in this case. And I don't do so to do that, folks. But I asked a question earlier of a witness, and I alluded to it in argument, that in all truthfulness, folks, in this case, Kristopher Love's involvement in this murder was no more or no less than the involvement of the cartridge loaded into the gun that he wielded. It was no more than the gun itself. He was just the instrument that held that gun at the time Kendra had his life. You know, from the first day and a half of testimony in this case, that the true evil, the true depravity of the heart, the depravity of the soul, lay in the heart of Brenda Delgado and transferred to the heart of Crystal Cortez. And you've already heard how Crystal's escaped punishment. I mean, she'll be out still and living a life when I'm long gone. Question of fairness. Question of fairness. I don't know all the details of the treaty that we heard about in the courtroom, but questions here in this courtroom today to be asked each one of you about fairness. The state says that this was a planned case, that this was a premeditated situation, and that because Chris Love was part of it, he deserves to die. For you to find that would be to disregard the law, to disregard the evidence in this case. He was a piece a cog in the wheel, because Kendra Hatcher was dead from the moment that Brenda Delgado decided that she was going to take her life. And I don't say that to you to minimize it. But I say that to you that when you put your head on your pillow at night and you say, I think justice will serve, you ask yourself, is justice truly served? Is justice truly served? Is this retribution? Is this revenge? Or is this true justice? Now, I'm going to sit down, and as I told you in the guilt innocence phase of the trial, I don't have an opportunity to respond to the state. And as I said, you haven't heard Mr. Fitzmartin argue. He's very eloquent, he's very persuasive. And I'm sure he's going to say, well, Mr. Johnson has misconstrued the evidence before you. But I know that, as I look at you, I know that in your hearts right now, you know that I haven't. I know that I have done nothing more in the last 45 minutes than sit here and tell you exactly what the witnesses have said from this witness stand. That Kristopher Love, there is no indication that he would be a risk to commit future acts of violence if you took away this word possibility. When the state's up here arguing, and I'm going to guarantee you that this will apply. Everything they're going to argue to you about this case and the reasons why you should put him to death, it's going to be contrary to one of the truths that I put before you here on that pulpit today. When they say, just look at the crime, it's so bad it tells you all you need to know. And we know that from the expert testimony, it doesn't really tell us anything. What's your verdict going to be? Is it going to be the verdict that makes some folks happy, others sad? Not everyone will be happy by any verdict in this courtroom today. You can't please everybody, but you got to please the one you got to live with. And you told me that you would do that.